Let's start talking about quality and why it's so important. So I think those of us in manufacturing who deal with products every day, there's obviously, as products become more complex, more involved, there's obviously increasing risk to product development, and things can go wrong. Here's some examples from various headlines. I'm sure we all remember Galaxy Notes exploding all over the place and things like that, right? So obviously there are huge implications to problems with quality occurring. So it's really something that's very important to keep track of and control, and make sure that we're getting products that meet those quality goals. Okay, one of the big tricks is really around that balancing act. Okay, so we want to create new innovative products to capture the market, to grab market share, to really sort of stamp our place out there. But particularly more in medical device, regulated industries, there's lots of compliance that we need to follow. So there's lots of documentation we need to provide, proof, maintain our standards and everything else. And then the other part to that is quality. Okay, so making sure that actually what we're producing is compliant, but also meets the quality requirements. And there's actually been, studies showing how even though compliance is increasing, it becomes more and more regulated. That's quality has been dropping off. So it's really maintaining that balancing act of getting those three things in alignment to produce really the best outcome for your organization. So one of the things is, I guess, what people sort of confirmed for us today is that really there are sort of disconnected systems. Okay, so this example, this is sort of focused on medical device because we've got the FDA in there under our submissions. But really, this applies to any kind of customer producing things. It doesn't have to be medical; it could be any other kinds of industries. Electronics, there's all sorts of regulatory requirements. But really, what you see is that we have our engineering team up here, and they're using their design tools. They're using a PLM system or a PDM system to manage all of that stuff. They might be doing things like design, manufacturing, and service. They've got the engineering records are really primarily dealing with their CAD data. Okay, maybe there's some documentation in there as well. We discussed that in some of the early webinars about why it's advantageous to have your documents in the same system. Okay, and then we've got a bit of a wall here, right? So then we move up into the other areas of the business. Okay, so in a regulated environment, you've got your regulatory team. So they're dealing primarily with documentation. Some of that documentation might come from the CAD artifacts, drawings, PDFs, things like that. But there's other documentation that happens. They're very much focused on getting that information together, making sure they can put their submissions into the appropriate bodies out there to get approval for that. Manage that approval process, making sure that that's all right, and the product is going to be allowed to be sold in the market that you're looking for. Okay. And then we've got the quality team as well. So again, they're looking at the quality records. What's happening with this? Are we meeting all of our goals? Are there problems happening? Customer complaints coming in? Are we dealing with any non-conformances? Are we running corrective action, preventive action tools? And again, that tends to be a very separated system. Okay, as many of you have indicated in the poll. And so really what that leads to is, you can see the points here on the left. We've got a sort of a lack of collaboration across those units. We've got that wall, okay? There's a lot of reinvention or a lot of, retyping or copying and pasting, duplication of information, okay? Because you're not using that sort of single source of information, okay? And then you start to get into problems where you've got disparity between, what was approved and then what you actually put out there into the field. Okay, and maybe you might do a bit of capturing that once it's been approved into some sort of like, as built structure, as supplied structure. Some of our customers do capture that, some of them don't, and then what does that lead to? If you start to get, recurring quality issues, then it's like, well, this is what we said we were approved to build, but is that actually what shipped out the door? There's mismatches between, what you submit to the regulatory bodies versus what the engineering documentation said. And I've talked to a few customers about this last one. The time and effort spent, preparing for audits. I'm sure many of you. I was talking to someone just yesterday who's getting ready for their ISO 9000 quality audit. And that takes up huge amounts of time. Okay, and in medical device companies, when you're doing those sorts of audits, they're a huge drain on resources, and there's lots of stress and lots of people running around trying to find documents and everything, get that all in order before that audit happens. So very common problems across multiple organizations in multiple different disciplines. So really the idea of that is to, expand that control to sort of the post market, right? So we're looking at sort of a combined system, right? So we have our engineering team doing our design, okay? And we've got our manufacturing and service that we were looking at a bit in last week's webinar, okay? But then we were also doing things like our regulatory information. Okay, when we're doing things like our quality information, our complaints and non-conformances, and our CAPAs, and that might lead into engineering change from a quality regulatory team. The idea is that that is all linked to the same product definition. We're not looking at multiple copies floating around there, where then you start to get problems around, is this version up to date, all that kind of stuff. Okay. So it's really around combining that information to make sure that everyone's working from that single source of truth that we've talked about in the past. Okay, so then the idea is we get better reuse of information. There's We can give examples of case studies where customers looking at double-digit improvements in quality. Okay, the common view, the ability to view quality events linked into the products and the parts and the bombs and the documentation. Okay, much less regulatory overhead, and in many cases, much less stress in terms of producing those audits as well. That's really the goal, what people are looking for with these kinds of solutions. So on the Windchill side of it, some of these topics we've touched on in previous webinars, but really, Windchill is there as a foundation for that closed loop quality. Okay, so I've got on the document control side down here on the left, we talked about how we can have our different documents in previous webinars. We've got different life cycles. We've got things like watermarking capabilities. There's other things there like e-signatures, including signature pages. A big part, particularly, I know for a lot of medical device companies, is things around training, tracking, so making sure that people are up to date on that information before they go out and start using that. So really, that whole source of document control, and Windchill can handle all of that stuff. Okay. In the middle section here, we've got our design control. So some of the core stuff that we've already talked about. Our CAD data management, our BOM management. We've touched on the last couple of webinars. Okay, but then we get into other things like materials compliance, environmental and regulatory requirements. We've got things in there like the ability to run design reviews, to plan out projects. On the medical device side, there's tools in there for Windchill around regulatory hub submissions and some of the new things like the unique device identifier requirements that are coming into play now. So again, that's all part of the design control within Windchill. Okay. On the risk side of things, not something we're going to get into in too much detail today. I've got a slide that talks about it a little bit later on, but particularly at the start of things, really this is that early stage of things. Doing things like our risk analysis, doing our FMEA, our fault tree, our fracas, to make sure that what's the likelihood of issues with this lifetime. And we've also discussed in some of the previous webinars around requirements management. Okay, so again, within Windchill, we can have our requirements. We can link that into our design data, so we can ensure that our requirements are being managed, and we can handle that. Okay, and then on the last side of it, probably more the sort of traditional quality side of things. So again, we're looking at things like our audits, our corrective action, supplier corrective actions, our non-conformance and our complaints, how we deal with all of that. Okay, so that's really what we've got all of those capabilities, and wrapped around the outside of all of that, you can see here in this big arc, is around how we manage our change control. Okay, so change control for all of that information. So that's what we're going to look at, touch on that a little bit in the demonstration today.